Yes. Julia has been a recipient of Spotify's Narrator of the Year Award for the most listened to narrator worldwide. She is also the first ever winner of the Gracie Award for Best Fiction Narrator and an Audie Award winner for Best Fiction Narrator of 2025. Her debut novel, My Oxford Year, was an international bestseller and adapted into a popular Netflix film. Her second novel, Thank You for Listening, which I am halfway through right now, became a Best of the Year pick at Amazon, Audible, and NPR, as well as a Goodreads Choice Award nominee and winner of the Golden Poppy. Okay, we are delighted that she is going to talk with us and read to us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Julia Whelan. Hello guys. Oh, that's not me.
It's always me with the mics. I never know exactly what I'm doing with microphones. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out in this crazy, what are we calling it, thunder snow? Incredible. Amazing. Okay, hi. I am so happy and so honored to be here today in my mother's hometown, no less. Yeah. She's here too. Hello, dead center. Aye. I just like to divert the attention whenever possible onto other people. Thank you, Ellie and Katie and Janelle and Stesha and Will, and for that matter, the entire team here for having me. This has been an incredible day already, and frankly, it's all downhill from here. So we have a bigger turnout than I was expecting, so I'm just going to jump right in and do my best to be mindful of everyone's time. I realized belatedly after writing this that this first line is going to sound like the setup to a joke, but it's my actual life, I swear. Growing up the only child, a child actor no less, of an atheist and a Buddhist living in a born-again Christian town, it's probably not surprising to hear me say that I never felt like I belonged anywhere except for the library. Oh. The main branch of our city's library was just around the corner from the fire station where my father worked, and my mom and I stopped by every time my dad was on shift. In fact, she was just telling a story when we walked in about how the first time they were updating my library card and just kind of casually threw the first one away, and it almost like it was baby teeth. She was like, "No, don't throw it away. That's our first library card." I can still remember what that short pill industrial carpet felt like under my fingers as I dropped to the floor and scour the bottom shelf for my favorite book, because I was a kid. Like, where else was I going to end up but on the floor? The library, and let's be honest, the librarians created my relationship to books. And those books created my relationship to the outside world. And it was this relationship that led me to acting, the most nascent form of storytelling, acting as if I were someone else, and then to college, where I was an actual student, no longer just acting as if I were one on TV. And this led me to my college graduation, where one of my best friend's mothers came up to me and asked if I'd ever thought about narrating audiobooks. Well, my first question was, what's an audiobook? Seriously, I had no idea. And I said it in the way that Maggie Smith said in Downton Abbey, "What's a weekend? What's an audiobook?" But then she explained it to me, saying that I could act as if I were many different people in many different circumstances, telling many different stories, and all at the same time. And needless to say, that was incredibly intriguing. So when I moved back to LA, I went to the Venice branch of the LAPL and checked out some books on CDs. Pour one out. Libby and Hoopla did not exist at the time, and I listened to them as I traversed the city, going from one on-camera audition to another. And with any time left over, I would get back in my car and head for, you guessed it, the library, where I would do the other thing that I love to do, which was write. Now, when I started narrating 17 years ago now, back in the Paleolithic era, I read off of printed pages The way they did this is they would actually overnight a FedEx box with loose pages via Pony Express, apparently. And then I would mark it up by torchlight with a quill. And then I would go into an actual recording studio to perform it. And that's how I learned to do this job, from other narrators, from being directed, from engineers. I learned how to pause to turn a page so that you wouldn't get the page turns on the mic. And now this is the iPad that I read off of in my own home studio, and advances in editing and distribution technology has democratized much of the industry, and it's allowed me to start my own audio publishing company, Audiobrary, which fills, thanks everyone, thank you. And now I get to create books that are in your library system, and it makes me so happy. So the tools have evolved, right? But the person and the purpose has been and always will be storyteller telling stories. So with that set up, I would like to do my first reading. This is from The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, which is based on the true story of the pack horse librarians who, during the Great Depression, were charged with going into their rural Appalachian communities, the ones way up in the hills and way down in the hollers, to bring people stories. For my sake, please pretend that all of the characters in this have a slight cold. It will help with the listening experience. I can't believe I got sick on the way to be doing this. Hang on. Okay. The house was ramshackle, the weatherboarding drooping out of place like a wonky smile. The windows were thick with dirt, obscuring the interior, and an iron wash kettle sat outside over the embers of a fire. It was hard to believe anybody lived there. "Good morning." Marjorie walked halfway toward the door. "Hello." There was no sound. Then the creak of a board, and a man appeared in the doorway, a rifle cocked on his shoulder. He wore overalls that had not troubled a washtub in some time, and a clay pipe emerged from under a bushy mustache. Behind him, 2 young girls appeared, their heads tilted as they tried to peer at the visitors. He gazed out suspiciously. "How you doing, Jim Horner?" Marjorie walked into the little fenced-off enclosure, it could barely be called a garden, and closed the gate behind them. She appeared not to notice the gun, or if she did, she ignored it. Alice felt her heart race a little, but followed obediently. "Who's this?" The man nodded at Alice. "Oh, this is Alice. She's helping me with the traveling library. I wondered if we could talk to you about what we got." "Well, I don't want to buy nothing." "Well, that suits me just fine, because we ain't selling nothing. I'll take just 5 minutes of your time. Could you spare a cup of water, though? Sure is warm out here." Marjorie, a study in calm, removed her hat and fanned her head with it. Alice was about to protest that they had just drunk a pitcher of water between them not half a mile back, but stopped. Horner gazed at her for a moment. "Wait out here," he said eventually, motioning to a long bench at the front of the house. He murmured to one of the girls, a skinny child with her hair in plaits, who disappeared into the dark house, emerging with a bucket, her brow furrowed with her task. "She'll get you water." "Would you be kind enough to bring some for my friend here too, please, May?" Marjorie nodded at the girl. Yes, that would be very kind. Thank you," said Alice, and the man startled at her accent. Marjorie tipped her head toward her. "Oh, she's the one from England. The one married Van Cleve's boy?" His gaze switched impassively between them. The gun stayed at his shoulder. Alice sat gingerly on the bench as Marjorie continued to talk, her voice a low, relaxed sing-song, the same way she spoke to Charlie the mule when he became, as she called it, ornery. "So, I'm not sure if you've heard from town, but we got a book library going. It's for those who like stories, or to help your children get educated a little, especially if they don't go to the mountain school, and I came by because I wondered if you'd like to try some books for yours." "I told you they don't read." "Yes, you did. So I brought some easy ones just to get them going. These ones here got pictures and all the letters so they can learn by themselves. Don't even have to go to school to do it. They can do it right here in your home." She handed him one of the picture books. He lowered his gun and took the book gingerly, as if she were handing him something explosive, and flicked through the pages. "I need the girls to help with the picking and the canning." "Well, sure you do. Busy time of year." "I don't want them distracted." "I understand. Can't have nothing slow in the cannon. I have to say, it looks like the corn is going to be fine this year. Not like last year, huh?" Jim Horner pushed the book toward her. They want money for those things. Well, that's the beauty of it, Jim. No money, no signing up, no nothing. Library just exists so people can try a little bit of reading, maybe learn a little if they find they have a liking for it. Jim Horner stared at the cover of the book. Alice had never heard Marjorie talk so much in one sitting. I tell you what, how about I leave these books here just for the week? You don't have to read them, but you can just take a look if you like. We'll come by next Monday and pick them up again. If you like them, you get the kids to tell me and I'll bring you some more. You don't like them, just leave them on a crate by the fence post there and we'll say no more. How's that sound? Well, I don't think so. Tell you the truth, you'd do me a favor. Would mean I don't have to carry the darn things all the way back down the mountain. Boy, our bags are heavy today. Alice, you finish your water there because we don't want to take up any more of this gentleman's time. Good to see you, Jim. As they reached the gate, Jim Horner's voice lifted and hardened. I don't want nobody else coming up here bothering us. I don't want to be bothered, and I don't want my children bothered. They got enough to deal with. Marjorie didn't even turn around. She lifted a hand. I hear you, Jim. And we don't need no charity. I don't want anyone from town just coming by. I don't know why you even came here. Headed to all the towns, all the houses between here and Berea, but I hear you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you. I love that book. I think I love it because it's a really good reminder that times have been hard before, and the goal is to use whatever tools we have to try to reach people, to forge a human connection, human relationship. You know, as the saying goes, history may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. When I do events like this, both as a writer and as a narrator, I get asked, how do I do what I do? How do I tell stories? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, both the writing and the narrating. And then I'm going to talk about that hot button issue that's on everyone's mind these days, yes, the dreaded AI, and how that might impact my world, our world, and the world of storytelling. But I also want to talk about a question that I get much less often than how I do what I do, and that is why I do what I do. Why do I tell stories? These are challenging times. Generally, of course, for many different converging reasons, but I'm going to try to only speak about my little corner of the world, which is storytelling and story sharing. And right now, there are people out there who don't want people sharing stories, or at least just don't want certain people sharing particular stories. And then on top of that, we have, as I hinted at, technology advancing at such a rapid pace that it's impossible to understand the full implications of it, but we're kind of being asked to adopt it all the same. And I can only say that for myself, it feels like we're just herding everyone toward this shiny new future while saying, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. You know, the robots will take it from here. And in the face of all of this, it just feels genuinely like maybe storytelling is coming to an end. What's the point of sharing stories anyway? Why bother? I just fundamentally feel, big picture, that it's about connection. I think it's about telling the story of who we are and why we are, where we've been, and even more importantly, where we're going. I would believe there's like many of us in this room who have stories that should be passed on, must be passed on to the next generation to keep that human connection alive. Because now that there's this thing that isn't human, which I'm going to talk about again in a minute, we're going to need more than ever to be reminded of what makes us us, to give definition and meaning to that. Here's where I'm going to talk about the writing side of my life, because as I've already covered, I make a living telling other people's stories, but I also tell my own. Or do I? So, hello, come on in. So I've written 2 books that I think most people assume are at least somewhat autobiographical, or what we obnoxious creative writing majors call metafiction. With the third one, with Casanova LLC, I think I finally broke the curse. Like, I don't think anyone actually believes that A Second Chance Romance with a Gigolo descended from Casanova is in any way a personal story to me. But also, I saw this tweet once, and I kept it as a screenshot, and I actually sent it to my editor when she told me, you need to trust your reader more. You need to not hold their hand so much. And I just responded with this tweet that said, and I'm quoting, "Y'all, I'm 40% into this book I'm reading, and this whole time I thought one of the characters was a horse. He is a man." So, my first book was my Oxford year, which is not helped by the fact that it was my debut, and back in 2018, not a lot of people knew who I was, and it's also not helped by the first-person possessive determiner in the title. Additionally, not helped by the fact that I did personally have an Oxford year. It says a novel right there on the cover, but I've spent the last 8 years correcting assumptions. And when the movie finally came out last summer, one of the first comments I got on a post was a woman saying, "It must feel so weird to see someone playing you." And I was like, oh no, we're back to that. I didn't have the heart to tell her it was actually a horse. So, no, see, the truth about my Oxford year, which I wrote about in the author's note, this is not like a big secret, I've been talking about it in the author's note and on every podcast I've done in the intervening years, is that not only is it not a memoir, but it's not even my original story. That story, the story of a young woman who goes to Oxford and ends up falling in love with a young graduate student with a life-changing secret, began its life as a screenplay, and not one of mine. The original draft was written by a man named Allison Burnett, and then the way that the Hollywood development process works, other writers were brought in to doctor, or what we actually call punch up, certain aspects of the screenplay, and I was one of those writers. The draft I worked on managed to get a cast attached, but then, again, as usually happens in Hollywood, it fell apart and came back together and fell apart and came back together so many times with so many different writers and directors, so that by the time the movie finally came out this last summer, 14 years after Allison first sold the screenplay, 10 years after I last touched it, and 7 years after the book came out, it is, as you could probably tell if you've seen it, entirely its own thing. And that's because it was not adapted from my book. My book was adapted from the screenplay. And that happened in the first place because as I was working on it, the producers got to know my opinions about it and what I thought it could be, and it didn't fit into the limited scope and real estate of a screenplay. And they're the ones who said, "Do you think there's a book here?" And I said, "Nothing has ever wanted to be a book more. But if I'm going to do this, you have to let me tell the story that I want to tell." And to their credit, they did. So what's that story? That's the story of a young person who thinks they're following their dream, who thinks they have it all planned out, and who discovers that life is subject to change without notice. And that's because two things were deeply personal to me at that time, and they're at the heart of that book. One, I was reevaluating my relationship to Hollywood at that point. I'd been acting since I was 9, and I loved the work, but I hated the business, and it was not getting better as I was getting older. And so I was starting to think about how damaging it can be to tell people never give up on your dreams, as if dreams are static and can never change with more information, with personal growth and experience. And secondly, I'd spent my late 20s dealing with death and dying and grief, and I just had a lot to say about it. I'd lost my father suddenly, unexpectedly, and then I had inherited my grandfather and my step-grandmother and had been a long-distance caretaker for two 86-year-olds, escorting them to the end of their life in the space of 3 years. I couldn't make this up. If this were in a book, people would be like, that's a little on the nose. The contract to write my Oxford year came through 2 hours after my grandfather died, which was the day before my 31st birthday. And it was only that summer, as I was working feverishly on the book, because there was a movie in development that would soon fall apart, that as I grieved my grandfather, I realized I had never taken the time to grieve my father. And it's that grief, that primordial stew, that lives in the pages of that book. And it's why the dedication reads, "To those we have lost, particularly fathers, particularly mine." So, is it my story? No. But is it my story? Yes. My second book, thank you for, I keep trying to gesture over here. My second book, thank you for listening. Same thing, honestly. Now, this time there was no existing screenplay. It's my original story, and I constructed it to be not only informative about the world of audiobooks, but to also be a loving send-up of romance novels. But is that what people take away from it? No. No, no, no. The whole time I was writing it, because of what had happened with my Oxford year, I just kept thinking, people are going to think this is about you. They're just going to think this is you in an eye patch. And that is essentially what happened. I get asked every day if my husband is the narrator from the book. And I always have to say, that is not the autobiographical part of that book. The most autobiographical part of that book is the main character's relationship to her grandmother, because that's my relationship to my grandfather. So I'm going to read you the most autobiographical section of Thank You for Listening. This came from a conversation that I had had with my grandfather. Now, for the purposes of the book, I changed all the details to better reflect the characters that I had created, which is exactly my point. The biographical details of myself or the characters don't matter. Now, in this scene, our heroine, Swanee, is talking to her old actress grandmother, Barbara, who she calls Blah Blah, because when she was a kid, she couldn't say Barbara. And they are at a critical tipping point. Blah needs more care. She needs to move from assisted living and into memory care. But Swanee has not been able to have a clear-headed conversation with her about this. And in real life, during a phone call, my grandfather was suddenly, lucidly, able to describe what it was like living in his mind during an episode, giving me the gift of perspective. And as he was talking, I kept thinking, you need to write this down. Other people need to hear this. And so years later, I finally did. Swanee was in a booth long after all the other studios had emptied of people, attempting to get ahead on her recording and trying not to think about Brock's latest email, succeeding at neither, when her phone lit up with a call. She immediately, if cautiously, picked up. Blah? Dollface! Everything all right? Right as rain. What are you up to today? Just recording? Swanee readjusted herself in the booth, removing her headphones and cracking the door for some air. How are you feeling? Oh, fit as a fiddle. Right as rain, fit as a fiddle. Suspicious, Swanee tried again. You sure everything's okay? Well, can't an old lady call her granddaughter? That a crime now? Definitely something in her voice, right there beneath the teasing. Tentativeness like an undertow. Swanee sensed the pull of an impending conversation. There was a pause as each waited for the other to start it. Blah finally said, Read any good books lately? That's supposed to be funny? I didn't hear you laugh, so no. Which made Swanee genuinely laugh, which made Blah laugh. But when it subsided, the undertow remained. So Swanee asked, Do you remember calling me last night? Blah sighed. No. Well, sort of. God damn it. I'm sorry, doll. Well, there's nothing to be sorry for. Tell me what happened. I want to know. Though she sounded as if she didn't, not really. Swanee left the booth. She needed space to breathe, to think, to talk. You were upset and frustrated. You said you were late for something. You thought I was bitsy. Well, shit, Blah Blah said thinly. Swanee sat on the floor, back against the outside wall of the booth, and tucked her knees into her chest. Are you aware of... I hate it, doll. I need a prescription for dumb pills. Swanee snorted. I don't think that's what they're called. Well, that's the generic. They both chuckled at that. Then there was such an extensive pause, Swanee was sure she'd lost her, that the next thing Blah would say was, Did you see Mitzi's facelift? Betty Lou McCarthy lived in the hollers. Damn it. Swanee hated being right. Who's that? School friend. And if I was out there when the fog rolled in, I wasn't going nowhere. Happened in an instant, like God poured gravy over everything. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Blah hadn't veered as far off track as she'd thought. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. And shapes you knew were out there, the old oak, the mailbox, her daddy's truck, all those comforts would get sinister. They moved around, weren't where they were supposed to be. Swanee didn't dare interject. It feels like that when it starts. Then people are born out of that fog. Some I recognize, some I don't. Everything shifts.
I can't imagine. It's kind of like being on a sound stage, doing a big dance number. Stagehands take up a backdrop and lower another. A desk flies in on wheels, a soda fountain disappears, and now there's a door, and in comes Jean, and we're tapping away at an office building instead of a diner. God, Swanee murmured quietly, not wanting to break this spell of clarity. And then, well, what the hell was I? Dancing, wasn't I? Swanee swallowed. You were talking about everything shifting around you, what it feels like in your mind. Did you want to say something else about it? Oh, I'm just rambling. Blah cleared her throat, and her voice was crisper when she said, Anyway, this is all to say, doll. Swanee heard the rustling of paper on the other end. I think I'm going to need more help, that it might be time to take the next step before I don't know where the next step is. Swanee hadn't known it was possible to feel relief and shock at the same time. She sat forward. You don't have to worry about any of that. Soon you're going to have another place at Seasons. You'll be just down the hall in memory care, okay? More help when you need it, but you'll still have Mitzi and Bertie and Amanda and, of course, me. You'll have me, whether you like it or not, she joked. A charged kind of silence fell, like the expectant moment right after the power goes out, waiting for it to come back on. Swanee heard paper rustling again. Listen to me, doll. I appreciate you more than you'll ever know, and I love you so much, and I want you to do something for me. Anything. Promise me. I promise, anything. Good. When the next step comes, you are not to visit me anymore. Swanee jerked. What are you? Let me finish. No visits, no phone calls. You are not to be any part of this. Of what? My end. All of Swanee's blood rushed to her head. I'm coming over. You're going to say this to my face. No, you're not. I've thought this through, thought it all out. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. The paper shook near the phone. I've decided. It's done. Now, enough of all that. I want to tell you about Bertie. I don't want to hear about Bertie. We are not discussing this. Blah's voice cracked, and Swanee's eye filled with tears as if they shared a body. Endings are messy. And I'll be damned if you remember me as a mess. Swanee was on her feet. That is not how I'll remember you. I'll remember you at the pool and cruising around in the olds and trying on clothes and smoking and drinking and swearing and laughing and rolling your eyes at Mitzi. No, trust me, you'll remember the end. Stop saying the end! Swanee was shouting. Shut up about the end! Don't tell your grandmother to shut up, Blah sputtered. Shut up, shut up, shut up! After a silence, in which Swanee felt like all her nerve endings had been thrown into a blender, Blah laughed and kept laughing. Swanee couldn't make her face smile the way she wanted to. Then Blah started to cry. To hear that and not be able to touch her could barely be endured. Eventually, Blah spoke. It's just so sad, doll. Don't make us say goodbye. I can't bear it. I need you to understand that. Leave them laughing, remember? Please.
Thank you. So, is it my story? No. But is it my story? Yes. Even Casanova LLC. My spicy little ditty about a sex worker and his one that got away is me telling my story. Have I ever bartered with a gigolo and spent a transformative weekend at his ancestral palazzo? Alas. But that book is really about want. And when I wrote it, I was grappling with the idea of want. What did I want at that point in my life? Very simply, I wanted to do what I wanted, not what other people wanted from me. My publisher wanted another standalone bookish rom-com, and everyone wanted me to keep narrating 70 books a year to feed everyone else's audiobook catalog and coffers, and I said, sorry, but I want to write this book no one wants, and I want to start my own audio publishing company to fix what I think is wrong in audio publishing that also, trust me, no one wants, and I'm going to do them both at the same time. So is it my story? No. But is it my story? Yes. Because here's the thing. The goal is not to tell my own story. It's to tell our story, the story of human beings, of being human. Our job as storytellers is to use our individual experiences to illuminate a larger universal story. There are many different ways to tell your story because there are many different versions of the stories inside each one of us, and I'm interested in finding the ones that I think have the most to say about the human condition. Those common denominators of what it means to be us, like choice and dreams and loss and acceptance and want. And it's those touchstones, those universal points of connection that are deeply important when you're acting. So another question I get, how can you play all of these characters who are so different from you, your background, your lived experience, your own identity? Well, there's a pretty standard dictum in acting, which is you can't judge the character. Your job is to understand the character, but the second you, the actor, start to judge the character, it's over. Because you're playing a person who walks through the world not judging themselves. So the second you add a layer of self-awareness to that portrayal, you're no longer the character, you're playing your opinion of that character. I talk a lot about this in reading and writing, actually. I really try to steer readers away from the conversation that you so often see crop up in book clubs or Facebook groups when someone says, I didn't like the main character, so I couldn't finish the book. Just like, why is likability so important? You ever know someone you didn't like, but you still had to know them? I lived in Hollywood. This happens all the time. No one is asking you to make a home-cooked meal for this person or move in with them. I think a more productive metric by which to think about characters in books is this. Is the character understandable? Do I understand why they are who they are, why they made the choices they made, even if I don't agree with them? This has helped me immensely in understanding the different ways we choose to interpret ourselves. I could never write a character or play one if I wasn't able to accept them for who they are and not condemn them for not being like me. Okay, without getting too into the weeds about how I build characters and how an actor approaches a text, I just want to do a very simple exercise, which I think might help you understand what it feels like to be someone other than yourself, if just for a second or two. This is not going to hurt, I promise. So, okay, everyone fold their hands. Just clasp them. Okay, great. Everybody comfortable? Feel good? Great. Feels natural, right? Because we've been doing it our whole life. Now, look down at your hands. Which thumb is on top? Right or left? Say it. Right? Great. Perfect. Okay. Here's the field sobriety test portion of the evening. Ready? And don't go ahead, because stay with the group. We're going to do this slowly for a reason. All you overachievers, just hang on. Flex your fingers. Very slowly. Wiggle your hands apart. Now, move your top hand down one space so that the thumb that was on the top is now under the thumb that was on the bottom. So weird. Why does it feel like an alien hand? What is happening? Some people just walk around their whole life doing this. On the count of 3, we're going to go back to the way it was. Yeah, it's like coming home. So what's the right way to fold your hands? Which way is right and which is wrong? And okay, just to throw one more into the mix, why do some people fold them that way? Is it men and women? Is it right hand, left hand? No, I don't know. There's no answer to this. Okay, another quick one. Fold your arms. This one is always, okay. Top hand, under. It's like watching everyone do the Macarena. This is great. Also, so awkward, right? Okay, it's just a fun way to make a point, but now it will haunt your dreams. So, because it's a habit, it's a pattern of behavior, right? We do it that way because that's the way we've always done it. But there are going to be people who don't do it that way. And it might make us feel uncomfortable to do it their way. And you know what? Because we don't have to do it their way. We just don't. It's fine. And they don't have to do what we do. You know, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, that's what we just did. I told you it wouldn't hurt. It's going to be weird and awkward, but it's not going to hurt. That's what I'm looking for when I break down a character. Those common denominators. What feels normal to them. That's really what sharing stories is about. When you're reading, you are in many ways taking on the job of an actor, trying to understand who this character is, what their life is about. And that's why, to wrap this up with the final promised portion of this, to talk about the elephant in the room of AI, I just feel like it showed up on our doorstep one day, like an alien spaceship, and it's getting worse. Every time I make a phone call now, I just feel like I'm screaming into a phone, representative, agent, human. And we were kind of promised that it would give us better tools to work with, make our life easier. And right now, I just feel like it's using us, not the other way around. So I was having dinner with a non-writer friend the other day. And I was surprised by the visceral reaction that I had to something that he said. He said that with the advent of ChatGPT, he could finally write the book that he's always wanted to write. I know, but wait. I hear you. That was my reaction. And he must have seen my face because he quickly said, yeah, but I'm not a writer like you. I can't write, but I have this story that I want to tell. And I thought about this. Because my first instinct, the very first thing that popped into my mind was that scene from A League of Their Own when Gina Davis is quitting the baseball team and Tom Hanks is asking her why, and she says it just got too hard. And he says it's supposed to be hard. If it weren't hard, everyone would do it. It's the hard that makes it great. And then 90 seconds later, I thought that maybe I was being a snob. Because maybe the skill of writing really is gatekeeping certain people's stories from reaching certain other people. And then 90 seconds after that, I thought, well, is ChatGPT really all that different from every other way that people have gotten around writing in the past? Dictation, ghostwriters. Why was I so offended by what he said? And I realized that what he said and what I heard were actually two different things. It's a difference of process versus result. He wants to have written a book. I want to write one. He doesn't want the process of discovery, of drafting and rewriting again, of self-doubt and victory and failing and self-hatred. He just wants the finished product, the thing. And once I realized that, I realized there could be space for both if, and this is where I really want to underline that, if the systems allow there to be. When we started Audiobrary, which has a pretty unique compensation model for both authors and narrators, number one being that it gives narrators royalties, which no other publisher does. My one concern, thank you, might allow me to retire one day. My one concern was that we might be too late. I might have waited too long to try to fix the things that I thought needed fixing, that human storytelling now had a shelf life, and I'd missed that sell-by date. But as a narrator and an author, I'm betting the farm on human storytelling because I can tell you anecdotally from the customers that we talk to every day, from the journalists who have followed this journey, from librarians, people can see the writing on the wall and they're desperate for an alternate ending, one written by humans for humans. So what can we do? There's so many ways it feels like right now in which the sky is falling. And I just feel like in my corner of the world, I'm choosing not to take a combative approach to AI. I believe in a comparative one. Because here's what's interesting. By virtue of its mere existence, it is helping people finally understand what it is that I do. They see now finally how it's different from this synthetic voice that reads you the book perfectly, but doesn't have any human behind it, is not connected to it. It's missing actual life. And I believe that we need life for contrast, for giving us the truth of both through paradoxical comparison. As the saying goes, can we know what light actually is unless we've known dark? So we're learning how to define human. I like the analogy of plastic plants here. Who has a plastic plant? Okay, I do too. Because I have this one corner of my patio and I live in the desert and the sun beats down and I've killed like 17 plants and they blow over in the wind and they make a mess, and finally I was like, I don't want to worry about this anymore. I don't want to think about this. And it does its job and it's great. But I also have living plants. And when plastic plants were invented, they didn't get rid of living plants because people still like the connection. It's a relationship. It's ongoing, it's fragile, it's ever-changing. We sing to them. No person, I don't care how clueless they are, brings plastic flowers to a date. Or if they do it once. We just know that's not what this is about. And I understand that plastic plants are hardly on the scale of the Industrial Revolution, and AI is going to change a lot. But I think a lot about the fact that when cars were invented, horses didn't go away. And when electricity was invented, you know what didn't go away? Candles. We give them as gifts the way we give flowers as gifts. And maybe it's because candles have a flame. And in addition to creating an irreplicable atmosphere, fire is one of our core elements. It's also something that lives, that we watch gutter and spit and flare. We could spend hours sitting in front of a fire and watching it, and no one in this room has spent hours in front of a light bulb. We weren't willing to give up the relationship we have to fire just to have light. I mean, since we're in a library, there's AI systems that will track your checkouts and knows exactly the kind of book to recommend, you know, like Spotify for literature. And honestly, as an author, as someone who wants people who are predisposed to like my book to find my book, that's not a bad idea. But I would never think that it could replace the passion of a librarian hand-selling a book to you. Saying, I have been up all night thinking about this book. This book changed my life. The AI doesn't have a life. It's not thinking in those terms. It's not thinking at all. It's not going to challenge people to try something different. And that's what librarians do, and libraries do. They create a safe space without judgment to explore things and to try something different. And as a child back at my hometown library, my curiosity was fed by discovery, which in turn created perspective. And I don't want my thinking process narrowed to something that an algorithm thinks I want. I want it expanded. And libraries do that, which is entirely the reason that some people want to destroy them. Because they foster perspective, and they can't have that. And if they themselves had perspective, they would know that in the long arc of history, the people who try to ban the books have never, not once, been remembered as the good guys. So I take comfort in the fact that the people who are remembered are the people who, in their own way, do something of value. They do something worthwhile. They do something good. Will we be heard? I don't know, but we can only be responsible for what we choose to do, not the effect that we have. The question of whether anyone is going to listen should never stop us from trying to connect. Whenever I think of this, I think of the final paragraph of Middlemarch, which, to close a narrative loop here, I actually used in my father's eulogy. I've always said that there are two kinds of people in the world: those who read the last paragraph of Middlemarch as depressing or inspiring. And you can probably guess which camp I fall into. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. We are all of those people. Storytelling is not what we experience, but how we experience it. Who brings it to us? And that's why for all of my pessimism, and I am Irish, so there's a lot, I'm optimistic that we still add value. But we have to make sure that we're the candles. We have to protect our flames. So I think all we can do right now is just keep sharing stories, keep asking people to share their stories. The tools with which we do so, like mine when I first started narrating, and Horses for Librarians, have expanded beyond measure. So let's use those tools and not let them use us. But amidst the abundance of the tools, I just urge you to remember that by virtue of their very existence, you become even more relevant. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, sorry guys. Dance party? Thank you for coming. Now all eyes on you, sorry. Okay, so I believe we have time. Great, I'm here, I'm hanging out. I know they'd like us to probably vacate, but anybody have any questions for me? Great, love it.
I see one over here.
Enthusiastic. First one up, let's go. I am gonna sit though.
So Ray Porter, who narrated Project Hail Mary, just shared that he cold read Project Hail Mary for the audiobook
Yeah, Ray's
recording.
insane.
How many times do you read a book to prepare for reading it?
Okay, so I read a book ahead of time. I have a funny Ray Porter story for you, but I read a book at least once because I have to get a sense of, for me as a writer, the tone of the piece and how I can best interpret that for the listener. On top of the fact that I've got to keep a character list so that I know if there's any vocal descriptions coming up. Like there's an apocryphal story about a narrator who got to like page 350 and realized, and then the author said something like, he said in his rough roll with that, to roll that dice. There's no way. Sidebar though about Ray Porter, because it's a good story, and I just told this story at the Audible Hall of Fame induction, which happened last week in New York, which is why I'm sick. Thanks. It was lovely. It was so much fun, but I got sick. So my mom used to take me to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I distinctly remember sitting in the front row looking up at an actor and thinking, that's exactly what I want to do with my life. And that actor happened to be Ray Porter. Yeah? In Labette? He was like, you saw me in Labette? And we were on the stage at Audible, and he was like, I was like 24. I was like, you were 24? I thought he was like 70. I had no, like, as a kid, I can't, he was like, I was too young to know I couldn't do that part, which is great. So, okay.
More questions? I saw that hand first, and then I'll come back to you. Okay. Getting my steps.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi again.
Hello.
As you were reading, I was really curious about your training in accents. And then I started to wonder, like, did you receive that training when you were acting in like typical acting, or was it audiobook narration training that you received? So can you talk about the difference of training that you received as an actor versus a narrator?
Yes, so that's a good question. When I think as an actor, you have a certain grab bag of accents that you're usually called upon to do. Some of those accents on camera, I remember when I first was doing an audiobook and a Jamaican accent appeared, and I was like, never had to do that. No one would ever ask me to play the 95-year-old Jamaican grandfather. It's not a thing I had to learn. So audiobooks definitely expanded the reach of the accents that I would have to have some familiarity with. The other thing that's difficult with audio is that when you're doing on camera, you can let a character's, especially if it's English as a second language, you can be more in the rhythm of what that actual human speech is. So, you know, if it's French and you put in a little, that sort of pause as you're searching for the word, it's you can do that on camera and you can't do that in audiobooks where everything has to be exactly as written. And I find that that creates the space for some bad accents because you have to have such fidelity to the text that it's why I always urge audiobook narrators to go light on their accent work, also for just like cultural sensitivity reasons. But it's something that I have certain accents that I've had for a very long time because I had to do them. And then some that I still continually brush up on or like find the differences in. Like if I was thinking of Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil where the difference between a Spanish accent and then an Italian accent, I suddenly had to really drill down on that in a way I hadn't before to make that book work.
Okay, we're coming back over here.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have to tell you, I absolutely love all of your audiobooks.
Oh, thank you.
Wanted to compliment
Surely
you.
not all of
Thank
them.
you. Many of them.
Thank you.
So one thing that my friends and I debate on all the time is the speed to listen to on an audiobook. And I'll just throw it out there. I do think that your reading right there was faster than what the recordings have been. And so
Probably.
what I wanted to hear from you is just like, what's the process to like, no offense to anyone who listens at just one speed, but it makes me feel like I'm having a stroke.
Yeah.
So, so I was just curious, do you read at the speed that you're reading right there and slow it down after the fact, or do you purposely read slow?
Yeah, so first of all, this is actually an interesting conversation because I think the industry has changed a lot. So when I was first starting out, we were directed to slow down because at that point, audiobooks were really more for an accessibility audience and you weren't trying to play to everyone. So you were told to slow down. The performance, I think, took a lot longer to change than society changed. And I kind of blame podcasts for people have just much more exposure now to people talking into a microphone at the speed of actual conversation. And so it made audiobooks sound glacial. I read here, I think I've like read these sections so much that they're almost memorized and I can do them. But when I'm in the booth, there's just the speed of processing. My brain processes it at that speed. If anything, I try to find ways to differentiate pacing so that if a character speaks a little faster than the other characters, there's some interest there. It's like I'm using difference in speed to tell the story better. But I'm still aware that some people are going to speed it up. And I used to be very anti that. I was very much like, and I still feel this way, where it's like, I am choosing to, this is the performance choice I'm making. You don't watch Netflix at 2 times speed. Like, I am choosing to give you this at this speed for a reason. That said, I have come around on that because of more of the studies that we have now of processing speeds, and that if people can't follow the story because of neurodivergency or whatever, like their brain is just going faster than I can speak, and you are losing track of the book, by all means, speed it up. Yeah, please. I'm fine with it. Although I did have a little bit of a crash out a few years ago where someone had shared a clip like on Instagram and it was at like 2.5 speed, and I was like, I'm not sharing this because I like sound so bad. And I called my friend. I was like, I think I realized that the only reason I'm good at this is because I don't sound like Minnie Mouse at 2 times speed. Like, people don't actually know what my voice sounds like. And she's like, you need to go touch grass. Like, calm down. Get it together. So.
We have some questions here. I'm just going to say I listen to it at 1. I
you?
guess my brain moves slowly.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for doing what you do, by the way, and
Thank
bringing
you.
these characters who we love so much to life. How closely do you work with the authors to understand these characters? Because I'm sure we have all listened to audiobooks that are not great and don't really represent what we, see on the page. And so you seem to have such a great understanding of your characters that brings them to life. So I'm curious how closely you're working with these authors.
There are some authors who at this point I've been working for them for so long and so consistently that they're actually like some of my best friends. And so when it comes to somebody like Taylor or Emily or Kristen, I I am working very closely with them because usually it's honestly, though, just like a text being like, who did you have in your mind for Miles when you were writing this? Like, so I can aim at something.
Do you want to share that with us? Or?
I said, with that book specifically, I remember being like, we're talking like young Harrison Ford and then me, right? And she was like, yep. So also when an author is writing a series, especially a fantasy series or something, I'd like to have a conversation with them to find out where you think you're going to go in the next like 5 years with this, so I don't paint myself into a corner. One of the luxuries, I will say, sometimes the publishers and producers like to keep authors and narrators apart. It just gives us too much power. But I will always send pronunciation questions through a publisher because I always want to make sure I'm doing right by what the author's intention is. And then if I have anything specifically to work out, like there's been a couple of people I've had full-on sessions with, like V.E. Schwab for Addie LaRue, we had like an hour-and-a-half conversation about it. Because I was like, how are we going to show the passage of time through voice? And that became a question about how to do her accent and how I was going to play that as like the slow softening of this provincial French country girl moving all the way to 2014 Brooklyn. And so V and I really like worked that out. One of the benefits of having Audiobrary now is I'm able to work closely with writers. Like I had this incredible experience with a book called Animal Bodies, which was nominated for an Audie. So proud. Thank you. It's an essay collection. And as I was recording it, I started sobbing through it. As you could see, I started doing here a little bit. And I thought, I'm going to leave it just the way it is, because that's the thing at Audiobrary. We're doing things differently. If it were any other producer, they would say, we have to be able to understand what you're saying, but we don't have to do that here. And then I sent it to my husband, who does the editing, and I was like, you tell me if this is too far. And he was like, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, I think you're misplacing the catharsis. It's not your catharsis. It's the listener's. It's that old acting thing of like, I'm not here to cry. I'm here to make you cry. And I was able to go to the author in that situation and say, but here's what I want to do. I said, this story moved me so much, and that was such a good point, and it reoriented the way that I think about doing emotional scenes. And because it was Audiobrary, I was able to say, I want to write a mini essay about this and include that take, a minute and a half of me just like losing it, in the bonus features for that book. And she was like, I love this, because she's a writing teacher. And she said, I think this is great. So it's situations like that where we can collaborate on how to make the best product for the listener.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So many of the books that you have narrated are many of our favorites, and your narration have truly brought them to life. I'm trying not to cry right now.
Join the club.
Yeah, right? It'd be like the fourth time tonight. They have brought them to life for us and have moved us and changed us, and they are books that we remember. So my question for you is there any one or a couple like characters or a story that you've narrated that has moved you or touched you or stuck with you throughout your career, or has been like an experience for you?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as I said, I think I said it in this one. This is my third speech today, but I've done 700 books, and so I hadn't. Okay, good to know. The ones that I really remember are the ones that were kind of mile markers in my career. So they either were books that just as a reader, I was like, I'm obsessed with this book, and I can't believe I'm so lucky that I get to perform this book, or they were like career turning point books. And sometimes they're the same books. I mean, Gone Girl was incredible. Giver of Stars was definitely one of them, because I love Jojo Moyes as an author so much. I look up to her, and I just never thought I'd get to record one of her books because they're always British. And then here she wrote a book set in Kentucky, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Addie LaRue. I mean, it's such a cop-out to say all of Taylor's and all of Emily's, but that's true. But I mean, like, recently I had the experience. Has anyone listened to Into the Blue? It only came out. There we go. What? Sorry. Yeah. So was I. So that's a book that, like, there's occasionally books that make me really miss acting on camera, where I just want to, like, inhabit the character and the book and just, like, physically swallow it. And that's one of those. The Women was like that too. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Any brave soul? We have one final question right up here.
Hello.
Hi, I
Big
love your
fan.
sweater.
Oh, thank you. I love your voice.
Oh, thank you.
It is I am an aspiring writer, and it is the voice that is, like, in my head when I am drafting to myself.
Thank you.
Sometimes,
Thank you.
Just special. So you mentioned something a minute ago about, like, curating the listener experience. And I've noticed that there are certain conventions in print that don't always translate as well to the listening experience. Things like if there's, like, a text message exchange with dialogue tags and things like that. How much opportunity do you as the narrator have to sort of, like, influence how those things are presented, or maybe, like, leave or change, like, the production side of the narration in those aspects?
This has actually luckily changed a little bit. I'd say in the last, I think 5 years, like, something just feels like it happened. I think the pandemic kind of made audiobooks part of the zeitgeist now. And I was just telling someone earlier that I had the weird experience of when lockdown happened, I literally thought, well, that's the end of audiobooks, because we had been sold the idea that it was only for multitasking reasons that anyone would ever listen to a book. And I was like, well, now that no one's commuting, I guess that's the end of my job. And it ended up being the opposite. It brought in so many new listeners who just didn't want to be screen bound anymore. Like, at the end of a day, it was just like, I don't want to watch anything else. I've been on Zoom work all day. I just want to listen. And I think as more people have come in, again, who have more understanding with podcasts, and also talking about speed, like TikTok, the way, how fast these people talk, like, we're just more used to things being built for audio now. And I have noticed that we used to have to do everything as written. The text had to be perfect. And that has to do with, once again, Amazon dictating how we live. WhisperSync, okay, used to have, and I'm not sure if it still does, but used to have a thing of, like, it had to be 98% accurate for WhisperSync, the audio, to be able to follow along with the ebook. So you couldn't change anything. And I don't know if that technology got better, or if publishers were just finally like, I don't care, I'm not playing to this anymore. But they have started to allow us to do things like with text messages. And when I was reading Thank You for Listening, which I did that to myself. That half of that book is text messages. And then I was like, oh, I guess I have to say Swanee Nick, Swanee, or Swanee Brock, Swanee Brock, Swanee Brock all the time. And then I was like, wait, I wrote this. I can decide that I don't want to do that. Yeah. So it's better. At Audiobury, we take out as many dialogue tags as we can, again, because I just don't care. I'm not beholden to the print edition. So I feel like it's changing, which is good.
Thank you so
all,
much.
Really.
Thank you. Thank you.